Hey guys, this video that I'm making is a little bit more formal than most of the videos that I do. So this is about equipment that you purchased for business. Okay? This is basically the name of the subject. So equipment purchased for business. Now, what I'd like you to know is that all equipment that you buy, all of it, from the smallest phone to the biggest piece of heavy equipment, must pay for itself. It must bring in revenue or money, revenue, to cover, to cover the costs that are involved with that, okay? So it must pay for itself. By bringing in money, known as revenue, to cover its costs. So there's two types of costs, okay? And what you have is you have ownership cost, the cost of owning it, ownership, okay? You have ownership costs, and you also have what's known as operating costs. Alright, operating cost. So just think about that for a second. Ownership costs and operating costs. Now, these costs are, I'm just getting my computer set up here a little bit better because I think I have some stuff in here that I want to make sure you get. Okay, so anyway, ownership costs, okay? There's two categories, ownership costs, operating costs. Under the category of ownership, costs, you have things like depreciation, excuse me. You have interest. You have taxes. You have insurance. You have storage, NCE, storage costs. And these all, they don't always all apply, but most things do, especially things that are costly. And then license costs and fees or whatever. So under ownership costs, okay, ownership. Depreciation I talked about yesterday in my earlier video, that has to do with how much something costs or you lose on that. Actually, it's a depreciation. In other words, you're losing in time. How much do you lose in time? That's depreciation. Interest, because a lot of people borrow to do things. I'm no different. You borrow money for your business, you may have to pay interest on that. Taxes, depending upon what it is. If it's real estate, there's taxes. Something as simple as initial sales tax can be put in here, because that sales tax can be broken down over a period of time so you get your money back. Insurance costs, if it's something that you have to insure, you know. Storage, think about this. If you're buying something, well, just a good example was the Woodmizer. I mean, I did not want it to be out all winter, so I built a little building. So that comes under storage costs, okay? That's an ongoing thing, because even though the building basically cost me very little, I will have to pay taxes on that building. I will have to maintain it somehow, okay? But that's not part of ownership, the maintaining of it, so we don't want to get too involved. And then licenses. This is like if you have, you know, to own a car, you have to transfer it and things, the license part of it. Or if you need, let's see, different types of equipment, like require that you, well, I'll just stay with licensing. Let's just say we'll stay with license plates for now. So that's basically what you got there under ownership costs, okay? So ownership costs, you have, and I need you to remember this stuff, ownership costs and operating costs. Now, the one thing about ownership costs, besides what I have there, is ownership costs, because they're easily, or they're not easily seen. In other words, when you look at the piece of equipment, you don't readily see these things. Because of that, these things are best calculated by the value of the time value of money method. So, and I'll get to that, but this is how you calculate what the ownership cost is, by using this information in conjunction with the time value of money. And it's involved, but anyway, we'll let that go for now. Okay, so then underneath what's known as operating costs, let's write that down here. So under what's known as operating costs, you have things like maintenance and repair. So maintenance, repair. You have tires, for instance, repair or replacement. I'm just going to write, this will help you to, it actually comes under maintenance and repair, but this will help you to remember what we're talking about. Tires, which is you need to repair or replace. And to a trucking outfit, tires is a major expense. Fuel, you know, I had quite a bit of heavy equipment, so fuel in this is more or less relating to heavy equipment, but fuel can also be batteries for your DeWalt drill. I mean, you know, this is what we're talking about. And then service. Now when you talk service, you're talking about maintaining stuff. I don't know whether you guys know this or not, but I had made a comment that I like Milwaukee drills. Do you know that inside the handle of some Milwaukee drills are brushes so that you can keep the drill running? I don't know if you know that. A lot of people don't know it, and some drills don't have it. But and also even drills from Harbor Freight, which are not cost effective. But the thing is they have brushes in a little plastic bag that come with it. So you should learn how to replace those so you keep things going. So anyway, fuel, service, and you know, basically, to give an example, we're talking things like filters, and I don't know, let's see, filters, and what else could we think of there? Grease. Like I said, with my backhoe, you know, these are costs. And when you're running this stuff every day, I mean, I'm using my backhoe at this point as a leisure thing, but I still consider all these costs in order to know whether this thing is helping me or hurting me. So you need to service things, filters, grease. Now, you know, this, like I said, sounds like heavy equipment. However, like I said before, you know, fuel, like a chainsaw needs fuel. If you don't know how long it takes for your chainsaw to run out of fuel, then you're not really in business. You're just cutting. As far as filters go, and you know, it's like to service a chainsaw, sometimes you can use air, blow out the filter. Sometimes you got to replace the filter, you know. Sometimes you have to replace the bar, and this is just on a chainsaw. If I were to go to the extremes, a $1 million dozer, you know, you need to change filters regularly. You need to grease it regularly. You need to make sure that this thing is well looked at, because it costs too much money to ignore this stuff. And then there's something else here, and this is a real eye-opener when you consider this. Most people never consider this. Downtime. So if you have a bulldozer and you know you have no work for it, it still needs to be paid for. So downtime is part of operating costs. So that means that when you charge someone, operating costs as well as ownership costs, all of them can be broken down by the hour, okay? And that's what this is about. Break it down by the hour, and that tells you how much to charge people, okay? And to charge because you need that much money to stay in business. And then the last thing you have here is labor. And labor can be a nuisance, okay? I am all for America, and I realize I have viewers outside of America, but I am all for, I only know about America, I haven't lived anywhere else. I am all for labor. I do not think that labor should be replaced by machines in most cases. However, that's my own personal opinion. It's not always cost effective to pay labor when you can have a machine do the same thing. And for instance, you know, I could go out there and say, okay, I'm going to cut lumber with a freaking handsaw, and I can achieve the lumber, but I could never, you know, pay for the labor cost would outweigh that cost of doing that by so much that I would be putting myself out of the ballpark as far as having work to do. I wouldn't be able to actually do I wouldn't get any jobs because the people wouldn't hire me. And a guy made a good point the other day on my YouTube page when he said that it cost him $7 to sharpen a blade, and I said it doesn't cost me anything to sharpen a blade. Now here's what I do. I charge myself out at like 30 bucks an hour. So I keep records of this, and for every blade I sharpen, I'm charging $30. Now his boys, the guy that sharpens his is charging him $7. I'm charging myself $30 because I want that money back. And it does cost more, it takes longer time to sharpen a blade by hand. But because I am not in need of that money at the moment, and I'm not charging someone else, and I have the time, I can do that. Now that is not the way you run a business. A business, you would go after those $7 blades because that's the hard cost. My hard cost is actually very minimum. It's the time it takes me to do it. And whether I charge myself out or not, I mean, there are times in life when you just don't get paid for something. And we're not talking about those times with this. We're talking about a strict business sense of how to do things, okay? So it's important that, you know, you have these things thought of. So operating costs, ownership costs. Operating costs, ownership costs. Think about that. So in operating costs again, repairs, maintenance, things like tires, you need to repair or replace them. Fuel, whatever kind of fuel that thing uses, we're talking about equipment now, okay? Downtime, getting back to this downtime, like I say, a lot of people think, well, for instance, if you are a small contractor, and let's say you have a dump truck, a trailer, and a backhoe, and you're going to use that dump truck to haul the backhoe over to a project. Now most homeowners or whoever you're working for is going to say, well, wait a minute, you only use the truck for an hour to bring the backhoe from point A to point B. In reality, it doesn't matter. That tractor and trailer, or truck and trailer, have got to be charged for the whole day. Now what a lot of people will do, because the most common man doesn't understand this, most business people will give a lump sum to move equipment. Like maybe they'll say, okay, $250 to bring the equipment over. Now, it may not cost $250. You'd have to, this is why you do all this math. Like say it takes an hour to get there. It may not cost $250 to get there. It might be a lot less. But if the people are going to aggravate you by telling you, well, you're not allowed to charge me all day for this truck, but yet the truck is sitting there and that's part of downtime, I need to consider that, because whether you like it or not, that truck has got to be paid for. I mean, they have a thing when you buy heavy equipment called skip payments for the winter, because usually, especially in this neck of the woods, sometimes the winters, and I'm sure there's other places that are worse, winters will shut you down with heavy equipment. And they still have to be paid for. Now, it's good that the heavy equipment manufacturer recognizes when they finance things that, you will have downtime, there is no money coming in. Why would we want to, strangle the guy with 3 months worth of payments that he can't handle? So they actually give you a break on that. It's called skip payments. And, I don't know if they still do it, but it was, in my time, that's what they used to use. I'm pretty sure they still would have that. And then labor. Now, naturally, labor's a tough one too, because labor varies. I mean, one minute you have guys who can do stuff, and you go to another crew and they're not as good at that. Like sometimes these younger guys are really good at framing because they can get around like monkeys and do stuff. Whereas an older guy like myself, even though I can make all the right cuts, all the right angles, I can cut way ahead of time because I know what they're going to need, and I don't need to measure everything. I know how to calculate it. If you have somebody that's not doing that, then labor fluctuates. So a lot of times the best thing to do is to take your worst laborer, or your worst equipment operator, or your worst whatever man is doing, and use his numbers in operating costs. Now, if you can refine that by teaching them, have a couple classes on stuff and make this better, you're actually being able to cut this cost, and that makes your company better. So, if you have a company where all the men on a certain crew are conscientious, or actually company-wide is a goal to have everybody conscientious. But if everybody can be conscientious and everybody's doing a good job, and basically they all take the same amount of time to frame out a house, or to pour concrete, or to grade something with a machine, or no matter what, drill holes, put wire in, whatever it is, if you can bring them all up to one basic time, this becomes a lot easier. Otherwise, this can be hard. Now, one of the ways you figure this stuff out is to take historical data, okay? So operating costs are best calculated by historical data. Now, if you're new in business, you don't have that, but you do have the programs, the software from the manufacturers that you can use to help you know what costs are. Of course, you know as well as I do, manufacturers tend, let's see, how can I say this gently? Manufacturers tend to inflate the longevity of things and how well they operate or work or last. So with that said, historical data is the best. In other words, if you know that every year you have to replace a drill because the drill just don't last, or say like the battery operated stuff. Battery operated stuff is nice, you're not dragging cords around. However, you got to buy batteries, so that's a maintenance item, okay? So under maintenance, like you would have to calculate, about batteries. So you can calculate that from knowing that, like for instance, I know that just using a DeWalt drill around my house here, okay, for the projects that I do, I know that a drill will probably last me 2 years, and that's about it. The batteries will stop being able to be charged, or the drill will slow down to the point where it's hardly running anymore. So I just, go and buy another one. And you need to know those things. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum, in a bigger thing, I mean, if you're running heavy equipment and you're, like say you're grading with a bulldozer, Obviously, a bulldozer that's grading topsoil, the blade, cutting edges and things like that, tracks are going to last a whole lot longer than one that's grading something like conglomerate, which is a rock that's been pasted together over time and very hard. It breaks up, but it's hard. I've seen cutting edges that weigh 150 pounds a piece on just the edges of a blade wear out in 2 months. So, you know, and they're costly, so you got to think about that, and you have to know that these things are going to happen. So it's not only knowing about the historical data of the machine itself, but you also have to understand about conditions. You know, certain conditions, like say a drill for an electrician is a much more valued item than a drill is for a framing carpenter, okay? You use the drill for anchor bolts, and that's about it. You know, you're off and running. But when it comes to an electrician, he's using his drill all the time, and he needs to have good drills, and they have to be able to last. The drills that last the longest are the ones he'll probably buy. We get to the tires. You know, tires are self-explanatory. Everybody knows tires wear out and you get flats. Fuel, you know, you got to buy fuel. And again, that's part of the maintenance, and all this stuff goes together. Service. You know, you have to service things, keep them running. The best thing to do is preventative maintenance, which is actually part of service. And, you know, this can be overblown. Sometimes some of these programs, and even with CAT, I mean, I like Caterpillar, and I think Caterpillar is a wonderful company, and I think that their people are all decent. But, you know, sometimes they want you to change things, do a chemical analysis on fuel, a chemical analysis on motor oil and transmission oil, and you know, it's good. I'm not saying it's not good, but sometimes it's overblown. I mean, you're doing so much of it. And yesterday what I was going to say, and I sort of cut myself off, when you take care of equipment like I do, you don't need to service things quite as often. Now that doesn't mean that you don't have to change filters. What it means is, or repair or maintenance, you can sort of back down from that because you're almost always doing it on a smaller scale. And preventative maintenance and repair is better than downtime and repair, okay? So even though you are down when you're doing this, it's better than to be forced into downtime than it is to just choose downtime. And then, like I already explained about the labor. So the important thing here is historical data. That's what I just said, all right? So let me just, for operating costs, the place you look for information, you can look in your brain if you got a good memory, but historical data, okay, is what you're looking at. Now, I probably shouldn't get into this at the moment, but I'm going to say it anyway. In order to get historical data, you got to have somebody who knows how to input information in your computer, and they have to be loyal to it. The easiest way to do this is a freaking general ledger, okay? A general ledger tells you all about, you know, what you've spent, where, why, and when. Right now, I could tell you how much money I spent at Wendy's, how much money I spent at the grocery store, how much money I spent for gasoline, and I'm talking about my personal life. I write it all down because it's become a habit with me from being in business. And the good thing about that is I always know how much money I have to have on hand, you know, every month to be able to meet whatever's coming up. You know, this is simple. It's not rocket science, but yet it's involved. So you need historical data, and if you have a good bookkeeper, the general ledger is where you can find that information. Now, you can't just write numbers down. In the general ledger, a lot of time numbers are just written down. But, you know, in the computer, I mean, even in something like Excel, you can have a lot of columns in there. You know, you can put down the date, and maybe you want to have the date and then what you spent, and that date can continue, and you can also put all your stuff in there. And this can become involved. I mean, you know, let's say I get a load of 2x4s, and just, this is a perfect example. Let's say I buy 50,000 2x4s. Okay, so I have all these 2x4s and they're going to go to 20 or 30 or 40 different jobs. I need to keep track of that, and you do that, and again, I don't want to get into this too much at the moment, but you keep track of where they go by giving a job a number. Like, let's say, you know, job number 1 is a house I'm doing, job number 2 is a deck I'm doing, or whatever, you know. Job number 3 is something else. So you use these number system, and you can develop a good system too, to figure out the historical data for operating costs. You can do this with labor, service, anything. Pieces of equipment, and technically a lot of this stuff is a legal issue. You need to do this. Just like if you have a corporation, and I did, you need to keep track of this for anybody that's invested in your business, as well as the IRS. They want you to keep track of this stuff. So it's something that you've got to watch, and you've got to make sure you know what you're doing, and you know, keep it there. You know, a lot of people say to me stuff, and I find this ignorant. When somebody says to me, oh, I'm not going to do something because it's going to cost me taxes. Like, my one neighbor says to me one time, I was telling him, I think I'm going to buy a small dump truck so I can use it around the property here. Oh, he says to me, oh, I wouldn't buy a dump truck. I'd get a trailer, because you got to, you know, you got to pay for fuel, you got to buy this, you got to buy that, you got to buy the other thing. If I sit down here and figure out all my operating costs and ownership costs, I don't care what it costs. I just figure out how to get that money back. And then I can buy whatever I want. I could be driving a freaking triaxle around here to move stuff if I wanted to, if I knew how to pay for it. But I can't pay for it with homeowner type stuff, so I bought a used small dump truck. And that's, you know, what I use. And it's the same thing, guys. Let me just take you off the stand here for a minute so we can have a different view here. We're in my office, by the way. Let me just explain this to you in a real way. Hey, Bullseye. This truck is a 2006 GMC. This truck has a very, very low mileage on it. I keep it covered. I do nothing with it. Now, here's the thing. Ownership costs. I don't owe anything on it at this point, so I'm not paying interest, okay? It's depreciating, but at the same time, it also is going up in value because, you know, the older cars, sooner or later, they come around costing as much as the newer cars. So I can afford to leave this sit. I don't have operating expenses, none. It's not insured. Why do I need to insure it? It's in my garage, okay? If my garage burns up, this truck is going to get paid for with that. At least that's what I would hope everybody could do. But the point is that there's no operating costs on this. I don't drive it anywhere. I don't do anything. Well, I charge the battery regularly, so you know that's would be the only operating cost, and that's minimum. But it still needs to be figured, and I can tell you what that is, you know, as far as the electricity goes. And then, so I don't use that truck. I have it more or less as an investment, but I use this one, but only if I want to go somewhere that I want to make sure that I'm going to get there and back. Okay, so I use this truck. Now, I don't have any kids anymore at home, and I love two-seater pickup trucks. To me, this is my man's domain. I don't want to hear about, oh, we got to get groceries and stuff. You know what? If we're getting groceries, they're getting thrown on the back of the truck. But anyway, getting back to this thing with business, this truck here I use for certain things. So there are some operating costs on here. I do get this truck inspected regularly, and I have insurance on it, a full insurance, just in case. All right, but here's the thing. I don't use this stuff as often as I use, where are we at here, as I use that truck. Now that's an 89 Chevy. Now here's something that you are going to realize once I say it. These trucks, the newer they are, the higher the costs are for them. And let me take you back in here and we'll look at this whiteboard and I'll explain this to you. So if you have a newer equipment has higher, let me put this here. New equipment has lower operating costs, okay? the operating costs are lower. Let me just zoom in here a little bit so we get this. Okay, there we go. So on equipment, newer equipment, the operating costs are lower because you're not breaking down. You're not, all of the things that I had written there is not happening so much. You get better fuel burn with your equipment when it's newer. You're not dripping oil all over the freaking place, but, you know, replacing that. You're not breaking down from metal fatigue. So new equipment, the operating costs are lower, the ownership costs are higher. The reason for that is because, let me just write this down so you can see it. I know some of you guys are like me, which is, you need to see it to understand it. Just talking about it, that's why I get a little confused when I talk. I'm not seeing something. So new equipment, I just write new equipment. Alright, so new equipment, the operating costs are lower, okay, because they're new, but the ownership costs, boy, that's not a very good thing, is it? So we'll put op. And then owner's costs are higher because, like I say, you're paying interest, for instance, on this thing. You're paying the initial monies that are put out to get it going and get it into place. For instance, a down payment. You know, you don't need a down payment on equipment that you already own or that are operating because it's already been paid for. So again, operating costs, okay, this is the cost of making it do what you bought it for. On new equipment, the operating costs are lower, but the ownership costs are higher. Think about that for a little bit, okay? That's operating costs. Now, when we take and we look at, I'll let it at that. So that's where you're at with that. Now, there's some other stuff here, let's see here, that I would like you to know. When you are managing a business, and I treat the business, my personal life and things, the same way I would treat a project. So all of this that you're learning here is actually called project management. That's part of this, project management. And the good thing about project management, M-E-N-T, it doesn't matter whether you're construction projects or whether you're working with something else. These projects and these things that I'm talking to you about can all be a part of that. And you know, it's important that you remember what I just said, and I'm going to add one other thing to this. I have something that's called the 4 M's, that's what I call it, and I mean, this is written in books, you can find it. The things that you need to take into consideration, okay, are money, manpower, machinery, and materials. Look on any job site, anywhere, any project, anywhere. I don't know if I spelled that right or not, I'm not worried about it. Materials. These 4 things are always there somewhere. Okay, guys? So that's where that's as far as I'm going today. I'm boring myself. So I hope that you guys who wanted this got what you wanted. And I'm going to go ahead and put this video up. Have a good one, guys. Bye.